Thank you very much. Most people think that what happened to me stopped with communion and that's it, and there's nothing more. In fact, nothing could be less true. Since 2015, my experience has exploded beyond anything I could have ever imagined. The most extraordinary experience I have ever had in my life of any kind took place last July. So it's going to be an interesting time today together. This is the cover of the book A New World, which will be published soon. It should be out probably by late October, early November, in paperback, as an ebook and as an audiobook. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about the book and what happened and why all of this extraordinary stuff has occurred since 2015. There's some very specific reasons for that. And I will also describe for you the experience I had in July. Now, this started in February of 2016. I have had a relationship with the entities I call the visitors, who are, this is a very complex group of different entities in which, some of which are apparently human, and whom I have had a lot of contact with over the years. Most of it is, I would describe as quasi-physical. In other words, since 2015, as I will get to in a minute, I meditate every night at 11 and 3. Right after my wife passed on in August of 2015, I began to be waked up at 3 in various ways, which I'll get to in a moment. And now I don't need to be waked up anymore. I have understood the importance of it, and I get up myself. So in February of 2016, I had a series of very brief physical encounters. And during these encounters, one of these encounters, I said that you have to do more than this. I'm only one person. This planet is in the process of failing. It's failing, which is why a lot of the seats are empty, because people know I say that and they don't believe it, and they would prefer not to. But I listen to what the visitors have to say always, and they have been telling me this all of my adult life. So yes, I think it is true. Now, you need to, we're not responding. We are letting it happen. You've got to come out and at least expose yourself for a few minutes or hours, so that all of these million-plus people around the world who have had contact experiences and given this message can come forward and say and repeat the warning. And it turned into a fight, physical fight. They said, their response was, we can't communicate. There is no one who understands how to communicate with us, because you certainly can't sit down and talk to them. Believe me, that does not work. And it's not because of something, it is because of the differences between us. It's not because of some unwillingness on anybody's part. In any case, I woke up, and they intended to show me what the problem was. I woke up at about 3 on that night in February of 2016, and I could feel that there was something between my legs in the bed. It felt like about the size of a cat. The problem is, I have no cats, I have no dogs, and there's no way that any little possum or something could get into my apartment in Santa Monica, and I hardly think that that would happen. So I thought about this for a couple of seconds, and I thought, is this really here? And then I felt fingers moving up my leg and moving toward my genitals. And that scared the living daylight out of me, and I leaped out of the bed, and this happened. That gash occurred on this calf of this leg. As this individual who had, I've seen them enough, they're not reported in any, there's no report on, there's no description of them anywhere that I've ever read. They're very small. They're very different from the grays or any of the things you've ever read about. But they are in my life in a big way. And they have small, long hands with claws on them. And it was one of the claws that did that. It took that over a year to heal, which was quite extraordinary. That's a long time in terms of healing. So this is not incidentally only about aliens. It's about somebody else as well. And that's what I want to talk about just right at first. Our dead are not dead. They are involved in this. They are attempting to build a connection between us and other higher and more powerful levels of reality, including, again, us. Now, why do I know this? I know this because of what happened after Anne died in August of 2015. My wife was, I don't know if any of you ever saw my wife, but my wife was a truly remarkable person. First of all, when I was a young man, nothing unusual happened to me until I met Anne, when immediately extremely strange and often quite funny things started to happen. Things that we were just a couple of kids. We didn't know what they were or why. But the reason was that the two of us together made a very powerful pair. And that is true of many of you in your lives, that these little batteries that we create that are called marriages are powerful supernatural tools. In any case, after Annie passed away, it had not been an hour, and well, 2 hours, before she first manifested her presence again. What happened was, I was sitting in my living room just devastated beyond words because we were extremely close and deeply in love, and I had to let her go. She had a brain tumor, and the tumor was destroying her, and she left. So I was sitting there, and suddenly the phone rang, and I thought, oh my God, that's the last thing I want. But I answered it anyway, and it was a friend of ours, Belle Fuller. And Belle said, Whitley, I just had the funniest thing happen. I heard Anne say, call Whitley. And I had been saying in my mind to Anne, Anne, if you still exist in any way, please let me know. And the call came right at that moment. What an extraordinary experience for me. But that wasn't the only time. It kept happening. A few days later, I was in the hills above Palm Springs and sitting on a bench thinking, Annie, if I would just like to somehow communicate with you. And it was Claire Henry. I don't know if any of you know the work of William and Claire Henry, but you might go on williamhenry.net and you'll see. And she said, Whitley, I just had the strangest thing happen. I heard, she knew by this time that Anne had passed away. Anne said so clearly in my ear, call Whitley. And, you know, I'm not stupid, I'm just slow. And I began to think, well, maybe there is something here. It happened again and again, 3 or 4 more times. And then at some point, I recall vaguely a conversation we had on the afternoon that Anne came out of her office after having read hundreds and hundreds of letters. She read oh, more than hundreds. She read tens of thousands of letters over the years of people who had had experiences and responded to the book Communion. Those letters, by the way, have now been archived at a university, at Rice University in Texas, so they are preserved for the future, and they're an absolutely extraordinary resource, and I'm glad a university took them over because they're going to be available to scholars from now on. In any case, she came out of her office and she said, "Whitley, this has something to do with what we call death." And the reason she said that was that she saw from letter after letter that people were not everybody, but a lot of people would have the dead show up with the apparent aliens, which was extraordinary and not something in those days we expected at all. But then Anne began to be able to get people to the cabin who she somehow knew, which neither one of us could ever figure out, would have experiences at the cabin. And this kept happening. And we would know that an experience was going to take place because usually someone in the group would see a dead friend or relative at the inception of the weekend. And this would happen again and again. And when it did happen, then later on that night, the visitors would show up. We determined together early on that because the experience I'm having is so strange, we would try to amass as much witness as we possibly could. So most of the cabin witnesses have spoken out. They have made their stories known themselves. So it did happen there. Those encounter experiences, which are mentioned in Transformation and Breakthrough, all happened. They were quite real. And many of the people who were involved are still very much alive today. So here she comes. She's back again. And I am kind of reeling from this. Then something more incredible happened with her. This is a picture of Anne as a portrait made by a photographer, Timothy Greenfield Saunders, who is also the first person I ever told about my experiences, and to my amazement, he said, "Oh, that's interesting. You know, my in-laws," meaning his mother, his wife's parents, saw those creatures in their garden just the other morning, and they lived about a mile from me. So, you know, that was really the first affirmation of this I ever had. And I said, I'm afraid to tell Anne. And he said, "Oh, don't be afraid. She'll find it fascinating. Go ahead and tell Anne." I told Anne, and we had been fighting like crazy because I thought I was losing my mind, and I was trying to drive her away because I know Anne well, and I knew her very well, and she would never leave me if I was in a madhouse and in an insane asylum. And that's where I thought I was headed because of the completely seamless, what appeared to me to be psychotic break that turned out to be an actual physical experience. Anyway, we had made up, but I was still very scared because now I thought the worm will turn and she's going to say, "My God, he has gone crazy. I do want a divorce." So I told her. She said, "Oh, thank God. I thought you were going crazy." One of the all-time great moments in my life. Anyway, so she was very clued into this. After she passed away, about 3 or 4 months later, a psychic whom I had never heard of, but who is known to my friend and co-author of Supernatural, Dr. Jeffrey Kripal, sent Jeff a drawing of a woman she had seen in her house. And she has this happen from time to time. She'll actually see somebody. And when she sees somebody, she draws a picture of them. And she sent it to Jeff saying, "This happened, and since you're interested in this when it happens, I'm sending you the picture." Jeff didn't recognize the face and thought nothing further of it, but he did send it on eventually to some other friends to see maybe someone else would recognize it. And Diana Pasulka, the author of American Cosmic, who's also a good friend, immediately sent back to him, "Hey, Jeff, that's Anne Strieber." Yeah. Cheryl Lee had never even heard of Anne. She knew my name vaguely, but that was all. So that came from there. I began to put things together, and I realized what was happening, because back in January, long before she passed away, Anne already knew her future very clearly. She said to me, "Whitley, I want you to memorize a poem. It's called Song of the Wandering Angus, and you're to memorize it and to keep it in your memory." And at the time, I couldn't memorize things for the life of me, but later I did memorize it. And the reason was because of something that she felt was the best short story I had ever written, called The White Moths. Now, what then happened was a white moth began appearing in the surveillance camera in my living room. As you may imagine, I've got a lot of surveillance equipment. There's no point in even asking a question as to whether or not I've gotten a picture of the visitors. I've been trying to for 30 years, and I'm still trying. In any case, this moth, I was at a conference talking about Anne, and my phone gave a text, and it was this moth that crossed the screen. And I discovered that, in fact, whenever I talked about Anne on a conference or anything in those days, the white moth would appear. And it would always do exactly the same thing. This next video is the white moth appearing 2 times. I'm not sure how this system works. I'm not certain that the video is running. And there's apparently nobody here to... What? Hit the arrow again. Okay. Oh, good. There it goes. Okay, so you'll see 2... see, there it goes once. And then now next one is weeks later. You'll see it again. And it would do that, only that. You would never see it. You would never find it. You would never find a dead moth, anything. And that went on for a couple of years. So, and why did it happen? Oh, at the Esalen Institute, I told this whole story. And the white moth at the banquet, at the end of the Institute conference, showed up in the banquet hall and started flying around in circles all around us. And one of the podcasters on my website, which is called unknowncountry.com, is a man called Jeremy Vaney. If you've ever listened to his show, The Experience, it's quite wonderful. Anne loved his work. She thought it was terrific. He was at the conference, sitting in the banquet, and everyone is laughing and watching the white moth flying around. It was absolutely, couldn't have gotten in. There were no white moths. It was February in Northern California. There were no white moths around, so we're all having a wonderful time with the white moth. And then the white moth finally landed. That's Jeremy's head on the head of the guy she really thought was a very good podcaster. It then took off, flew toward a fireplace where there was no fire lit, but it's a big rock chimney there. Flew toward it, and before all of our eyes, poof, gone, just like that, just gone. And you know, when something disappears before your eyes, when a magician does it, somewhere in yourself, you know it's a trick. But when this happens, the way it feels is different, and it's really very weird. So the poem is called Song of the Wandering Angus by W.B. Yeats. And it goes like this, and you'll see the white moths in here. I went out to a hazel wood because a fire was in my head, and cut and peeled a hazel wand and hooked a berry to a thread. Now, of course, I remember it so well, but hooked a berry to a thread. When white moths were on the wing and the moth-like stars were flickering out, I dropped the berry in a stream and caught a little silver trout. When I laid it on the floor and went to blow the fire aflame, something rustled on the floor and someone called me by my name. It had become a glimmering girl with apple blossom in her hair, who called me by my name and faded through the brightening air. Though I am old with wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands, I will find where she has gone and kiss her lips and take her hands and walk in long dappled grass and pluck till time and times are done the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun. This is the book that we wrote together after Anne died. And you can get it on Amazon or wherever. I guess it's in a lot of places. I no longer can get published. I have to publish my books myself. So this is published by by Walker & Collier, my company. And it's a lovely book, and it is also available as an ebook on audible.com, which I read myself. Now, what happened was this. Right after in September, I believe it was, of 2015, I decided to go to a conference that William and Claire Henry were holding at the Scarrett Bennett Center in Nashville. And I did that because of the fact that they were such close friends, and we'd had all the Dreamland festivals there, and it was a place of great nostalgia for me. While I was there, a woman came up to me and said, "Mr. Strieber, I have something I'd like to tell you." And I said, and she was nervous. I said, "Why be nervous? I mean, I've heard everything at this point, no matter how weird it is." She said, "Well, I just heard your wife talk to me in my ear, and she said, tell him I can see him when he's in the chair." This was huge for me, because many, many years ago, the visitor said to me, when I asked them why they had come, "We saw a glow." And I thought at the time, oh, that must mean the glow of cities and so forth, but that's not the glow. The glow is something that we produce when we do a particular type of meditation that is called the sensing exercise. And there's lots of places. You just go on the internet and go and ask about sensing exercise, and you can learn about it. What it does is you place your attention on your physical body, and it causes the nervous system to glow in a way that it is visible in another level of reality. I'm quite sure that this is what happens. And so this is probably why I've been so involved with the visitors for so long, because I've been doing this every night since 1970. I learned it in the Gurdjieff Foundation. And you can also Google Gurdjieff, Gurdjieff Foundation, and you'll find chapters of it all over the world, in fact, and you can go and learn the sensing exercise there. So that is why it all happened. Now I want to fast forward to the past few weeks and months. A few weeks ago, the implant, which is in my left ear, it's been at the top, pinna, the top of my ear for years, suddenly moved down into a different position. And it hasn't moved. The last time it moved was when for those of you who don't know, it was put into my ear in May of 1989 by two people at night. I could not stop them from coming in to the house. If you want to read more about what this is like, there's a book out there called MILABS, M-I-L-A-B-S, which will describe this, how this all works. And apparently they look like and sound like military people, but they're not that. They're something else, because they have access to extraordinary technology. And I just met two of them again last week, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. In any case, they put this in 1989, and for all those years, I could not figure out what to do with it. Every once in a while, it would turn bright red, and obviously it was, I would think, transmitting. As Anne put it, I was very nervous about it. At first, I felt watched, and she said, "Whitley, nobody cares whether or not, aliens don't care if you're going down to the 7-Eleven or not, so forget about it." I said, well, that could be true. But I still wanted it out. And finally, in 1997, I met a Dr. John Lerma who was willing to take it out. He did not know it was an implant. He thought it was just a little cyst. And Annie had not been willing to let me have Roger Lear, who we both knew and loved very much, take it out. So she said, okay, you try once, but if it doesn't work, then promise me you'll never try again. See, she knew things she did never, I don't think she ever told me, and maybe didn't consciously know herself. Anyway, as soon as he touched it with a scalpel, it moved down all the way into my earlobe in an instant. And he just was shocked because, you know, it had been a cyst and all of a sudden it came to life. And so anyway, he closed up and it went back up into my ear where it remained. And in a couple of weeks ago, it suddenly moved. And there are some doctors and scientists who are very interested in it, and some other things I do, and they wanted the implant. And I thought, well, I'm not going to give them the implant because it's too useful to me. I'll tell you about that in just a moment. But I will let them do a CAT scan. And so they did a CAT scan. This is the CAT scan. You can see it down there on the right. That's actually my left ear. It's inverted. CAT scans are inverted. And it's returning a signal, but that's not a signal of metal of any kind. That is a signal of the material that my body put around it to isolate it over the years. There's no metal at all visible there anymore. Now, about 5 days before I had the CAT scan, the following thing happened. One of the things that happens, and I have a lot of communication with knocks and noises in my apartment that are very formalized, they're very specific. And when they happen, there are certain things that I will do in order to get into communication with the visitors. One of those things that happens is 2 very soft knocks on the door. And that had been annoying me for a couple of years because for a while I was scared to open the door. Then I thought, here you are, you're trying to do this, you're trying to make contact work, which is what my life is. And someone's knocking on the door and you're not opening it, and it does sound like them. So I started opening it. And there was never anybody there, which is so typical. This is really the most annoying experience you can possibly have because you know it's all around you and you can't quite make it come into focus. Well, a couple of weeks ago that changed. I was lying in bed. I had just done the meditation, the 3 a.m. meditation. It was about 3:40. I hadn't gone to sleep when I hear knock, knock on the door. I think, oh God, I'm just about to go to sleep, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I get up expecting to see nothing. I open the door, and to my horror, there are 2 men there. And I think, well, you know what I thought. And the next thing that happens is I go into a state that felt sort of like twilight sleep, like if you are maybe having a bunion removed or some very minor surgery, they might put you in a state of kind of twilight sleep, but not totally asleep. But I could still walk. I could still move and talk. They came into the room. And they said, and this is when I still thought the implant still had metal in it that we could study. They explained that they did not want me to take it out. And they brought with them a typewriter. Now this is important because one of the things the implant does is that when I'm writing, it's the best research tool anyone could ever have. And I hope to God a lot of people who do intensive research get these eventually. I know of only one other person who has one, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. Anyway, it opens a slit in my left eye, not in my right, in my right eye, not in my left eye. And you can see words flashing through the slit at breakneck speed. And it has always worried me because this happens when I'm writing, and this, whatever it is hitting me subliminally because they're too fast to read. Unless you really work at it, you can occasionally read one. Now, I was very well aware of the fact that this had something to do with the dead, because about in the April after Annie died in August, and the next April I was walking across a street when it became very visible. And I actually stopped in the middle of the street because I could look and see it like this. And very clearly, words went through. I had been asking because its skill had ramped up. It was really giving me a lot of great ideas. And I had been asking, who are you? And the words went through very clearly, it's me, Anne. And I thought, wow, now I'm beginning to understand something. Okay, let's fast forward. The two guys are there. They have the typewriter. They tell me this is the typewriter that's actually used to generate these words, which are in Courier. They look like old-fashioned typewriter typing is what they look like. And of course, I immediately said, well, how much would one of those cost? And one of the men, only one man talked. He said, $10. I said, I'd like to buy one. He said, well, you can't buy one. I said, okay. Then I don't see any way that thing could communicate with me. It's just an old typewriter. And he said, no, the communication part of it is in the platen, which is the black place that the paper rolls around in an old typewriter. And I looked at it and I thought, I picked it, I actually held it, and it was just light as a feather. It was lighter than any typewriter. It was really nifty. I wish I had it. Anyway, I asked them what this technology was and what it did, and they said a very fascinating thing. They said it doesn't put words into your mind, it draws them from deeper inside yourself, and it's expanded associative thinking. In other words, what it's like is a thesaurus that's really expanded, that creates all kinds of associations that I have in my own mind, but that are unconscious, and draws them close enough to consciousness to where they actually come into my thought processes. In other words, a truly wonderful machine. Now, I said, how does it work? And he said, I don't know. It was designed by Dr. Rodavay. And I thought he said raw dive. I didn't hear it very clearly. And I thought afterwards, what is that? And I Googled R-A-D-I-V-E and got various salesmen and so forth. And I thought, oh, was there a U in it? And then I remembered I had a friend who is an expert on a guy who did electronic voice phenomena called Konstantin Rodavay. So I Googled Konstantin Rodavay, and sure enough, there he was. This is the man this is who they were talking about, who has apparently worked from the other side and is building these things. Now, the expert I knew who was an expert on Rodavay, I sent him an email explaining all of this, and he sent me an email back. He said, you know, I have that same slit in my right eye with the words flashing through it. I've often wondered what it was. And I thought, my God, this man is a scientist who is dead, who has invented this, and is now being placed in people on our side in order to organize communication. Now, I have Dr. Rodavay's voice here, and I'm not quite sure. It says, my electronics failed, of course, but you should be in a car with me sometime. It's quite fascinating when I have one of these electronic conniption fits. People have almost jumped out of a moving car when that happened, because often when it's happening, you know, you can't control the car very much because they're electronic in these days. In any case, this probably won't work. Try it. Okay, anyway, it's something you've probably heard before, which is Dr. Rodavay voice from the other side. And you can easily find, just Google, or go to YouTube and go to RAUDIVE, and you will find many examples, both of voices that he recorded and of his own voice from the other side. Okay, it's coming from the wrong place. Yeah, okay. In any case, Dr. Rodove clearly was involved in this in some way. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about one of the two men I saw. And they were very sweet to me. There was nothing menacing about them. This man, I recognized. I saw him last when he was 12 years old in a situation that I've been asked not to talk too much about. In other words, all the details I can't get to, but you can probably find bits of it here and there in my fiction in the book, The Greys. I met him when he was 12, and he and his sisters were phenomenally skilled at reading and entering the mind. And they were under the care of someone who knows a lot about that, and there are quite a few children in this world who are in a similar situation. I recognized him immediately, and I was so happy to see him because he's now in his 30s. He looked healthy and happy and in control of his life, and so it was a really good experience. This may be Dr. Rodove.
When I picked up the receiver, a clear male voice said, "This is Constantine Rodove." I quickly pushed the record button of my Sano tape recorder that is connected to my telephone and asked, "How are you, Dr. Rodove?"
"I'm as fine as a dead one can be. Dear Sarah, thank you very much for everything you did for the propagation of the voices. We tried and we succeeded in building this bridge to the States. You are one of the first who architected Spider's meaning. Thank you very much for all the work you did. We're very proud and honored that we could contact you. I must interrupt now. This was the first contact. This was Constantine Rodove speaking."
Thank you so much.
Now, that voice has been analyzed. That is not a human voice. It's something generated in some electronic manner. In other words, if you try to do a voice print on it, it doesn't work right. So it's quite interesting, and there's a lot of this material, electronic voice material. Interestingly enough, the people who had in the past been able to do this, it doesn't work so well anymore. But apparently they've gone on to other things, because if me and this other man are not the only people with this thing that's happening in the head, well, they could have a great penetration of our world and maybe expand it. And what I would like to see is if they don't have to hide it. Because my first reaction, as I told you, is to get rid of the thing. I was terrified of it. Now, and this is what's so fascinating, a few days after this meeting, when I thought after the meeting, I thought, aha, they don't want the metal, the doctors to see the metal. They don't want it analyzed. But a few days after, it turns out there's no metal there anymore, even though the thing is still working. There's nothing for them to analyze. And one of the doctors said, you know, we can take this out, it'll just take a minute. And I was so, if I hadn't had that meeting, I would have said, yeah, sure, let's get rid of it, if it doesn't matter anymore. But somehow it does matter, and that's really why they were there, because they knew in advance what we would find. and that if they didn't come and talk to me, I would assume that it no longer mattered and get it taken out, and so they prevented me from doing that. Now, we're going to fast forward. I'm going to read very briefly something that happened in at the Contact in the Desert Conference in June. Okay. I was at the Contact in the Desert, which I'm sure some of you know about. It's a conference that takes place out in Joshua Tree every year. And as I was walking down a hallway, there was a sort of popping sound, and I felt like the air pressure had dropped. And I said to the person walking beside me, "Hey, what's that? It feels like the air pressure's changed very suddenly." And he just walked along as if I wasn't there. You'll find out why in a minute. I then went to Dr. Jacques Vallée's lecture and sat down and listened to it. Everything seemed perfectly normal. A few weeks later, I got this. It appeared in my email from one of the other people who had been at the conference. "I was on my way to Jacques Vallée's lecture when I saw Whitley coming down a side path in my direction, looking deep in thought. Our paths were going to cross. Just before we were about to intersect, I glanced down to check that I had my phone in my bag. A bright flash from Whitley's direction caught the corner of my eye. This is the moment when I was feeling the pressure change. Oddly, I thought, that's him flashing to another dimension. In the same instant, I looked up. Sure enough, no Whitley. He was there, then he wasn't. I had no sense of this at all, except for the pressure change. It's hard to describe how confusing and odd it felt. The atmosphere suddenly felt heightened and sound seemed to drop away. At the same time, a sense of immense, great benevolence came over me, as if someone with kind good humor, as reassuring me that everything was okay. It felt like a gift. It felt like magic. And I'm very glad she had that sensation, because, you know, the people who don't want us to succeed at this spread constant stories, unending stories about how terrifying, how evil it is. You can go on the History Channel, and anything from TTSA is going to tell you about military fights and so on and so forth, and all the terrible horror stories you can read about the abductions and stuff. They are hard, those abductions, but it's also hard for a kitten to go to the vet. So bear that all. What does that mean? It can't, it's what? I turned my phone off. Oh, okay. All right. Okay, it could be, who knows? Listen, I buy computers on eBay for $150 because I run through them so fast. And actually, I have one now I bought for like maybe $150, $200 on eBay 4 years ago, and it's still working. But I usually have 3 computers going at the same time, one of which never touches the internet. That's the one I write on. And when I need to move material onto my encrypted server outside of this country, I put it on a thumb drive and move it to another computer, so the computer that I'm writing on has never been on the internet. In any case, not that I think that anyone would do anything bad, but let's put it this way: the computer that does go on the internet has been blown out so many times, I don't even worry about it. When it blows out, I just junk it and buy a new one. That happened, the last time that happened was about 3 weeks ago. So, in any case, let me get back to my notes here. Okay. Anyway, I asked the implant, no, wait a minute, we have a shorter time here, so I'm going to go to something else. Okay. At the Contact in the Desert Conference, when I was in my hotel room that night, I saw something in the room during the 3 a.m. meditation. It was a thing called a vesica piscis, which is a just a geometric shape. But it was very, very black and dark, and I'm looking at it and trying to figure, is this a shadow or what is it? It proceeded to move slowly toward me and lie down across my feet. If I disappear, don't be surprised. And lie down across my feet. I looked down to be sure that there was something there, because I could feel a slight weight, and I could not see my feet. I could see the darkness, and I felt this sense of being beseeched, as if it wanted to enter me and become in some way connected to me. And I thought, am I ready for this? And I moved my feet back slightly, and it did not. It then disappeared. Now we will go to another place. We're going to go to the Badlands and to the Pine Ridge Lakota Sioux Reservation. This is now July of this year, when I had, as I said at the beginning, the most extraordinary experience of my entire life. And believe me, when I say that, I've had some very unusual experiences, as you well know. This was beyond belief, but it happened. In fact, I don't know if Alan Steinfeld is, he was witness to part of it. So here's what happened. This reservation is the poorest county in the United States. It is a very oppressed place materially, but it is also one of the most spiritually advanced places in the world. And you notice when Michael Tellinger was talking about the shaman, these are the people who have the circuitry still intact that connects us to our reality, to our real world. You know, Betty Andreasson Luca, when she was being hypnotized, came up with what they thought was a star language. And she repeated it, and when I was listening to the hypnosis tapes, I thought, that's Gaelic. And so I got a Gaelic expert to listen to it. And it turns out to be a very ancient form of Gaelic. And he said it is a message, translated into English, it is, children of the northern peoples, you wander in eternal darkness. The northern peoples, these people who still have their feet on the ground, like the Lakota Sioux, are not in darkness. So the result is that the confluence of their energy and the energy of the land did what it did to me, which was, about 2 hours after I arrived on the reservation, Alan and I were going to go to a little conference there that turned out to be the biggest conference of my life. I noticed I was riding in a car, and I closed my eyes for a couple of seconds because distances are long and I was tired. And to my amazement, when I closed my eyes, instead of blackness and a few little, the usual experience, I saw in a completely other world flowing past in the car. And I opened my eyes because I thought, that can't be real. I closed them again, and there it was again. This other world was there, all around us. And not only that, it was so detailed, it was astonishing. There were rivers, it was very much like this world, but it was not quite the same. And let me give you an example of what I mean. We were about 5 of us in a car, and I began telling everybody, wow, there are trees there and this and that and the other thing. And we were on a road also in the other world, but in our world, the road is graded and straight. In the other world, it was hugging the landscape. And I knew this was a very extraordinary experience when our road went straight, but the road I was looking at in my closed eyes went off down a hill because it felt like the car had started flying. It was absolutely amazing. It felt exactly like the car was flying. Now, this didn't go on for a day or an hour. It went on for 3 full days. I found, these are some pictures Alan took of me. This is me with my eyes closed, looking down at the other world. What I am seeing is a version of what's right there, except everything is different. The grasses, the stones, the little flowers are all different, because when I open my eyes, I see one version, close them, I see another. I could count the petals on the flowers. I could count the grasses, blades if I wanted to. The little stones, everything was there except different. Are we finished? Okay, a couple minutes. Well, I'll be very brief then. I'll go, one other thing. This is at the Wounded Knee Memorial, and that in the background is a graveyard. And one of the weirdest things that happened was that when I was in the graveyard, one of the other conferees kept coming and standing beside me and then walking away, and standing beside me and walking away when I was actually looking down at the tombstones. And he said afterwards, he came up and said, "Mr. Strieber, when I stood beside you, I could see down into the ground and I could see the skeletons. I couldn't, but he could." In other words, there was an energy there that was really there for all of us if we had the luck or the sort of on the right frequency. There's another world right here, and we've gone blind to it. Now, I tried hard. This is a picture Alan took of me in the Badlands meditating. I don't know how well you can see it, but I was trying at that moment to use the sensing exercise to actually move into the other world. I couldn't do it, not quite, but I can assure you it's possible. I've had this experience once before, or twice before, in other situations, very brief, once with a child in the car. It's a complicated story. We don't have time for it now. But I couldn't quite make it, but I tried very hard. And I think Alan sensed the intensity of that, and that's why he took the picture. Yeah, well, it felt, I was trying to get out of here, go into the other world and bring back some samples. I don't ever go into it, but I was once in a UFO and I tried to steal it, and I think that's one of the reasons that they've always been so wary of me, because I will try to get anything I can get my hands on. They are not fools, they know that. And there'll come a time when we can. And that's what the book A New World is all about. And I'll tell you this about the life of that book. Not many people will read it, because they figure, oh, Whitley Strieber, communion, I know all that. I've read that book. It won't be published by a big publishing house. It'll just be published by me. A few people will see it on the internet. Most people forget about it and never touch it. But it contains information that will enable contact to work. And if the visitors want to, they can come out more openly, and people can use that book to learn how to interact with them. So it's there if needed. If not, well, I'll stay where I live, which is in the poorhouse. It's all about this, something that Phil Corso said, a new world if we can take it. But we have to work at it. We have to go past our fear. I understand the fear. It's much deeper and much more difficult to handle than we have realized. But I understand it, and I understand how to work with it and how to work past it. And they can too, because both sides feel it. We can build this bridge between us and not only what we think of as aliens, but a whole lot of other beings and entities, including our own species, which is fractured and can become whole. So.